During the last pandemic lockdown in the United States, we heard that many young people had started taking their own lives. Someone I actually know, an acquaintance, has a terrible story, and this is a prominent individual, of their son who was 12 who took his own life. It may be a bit more sensationalist than I'm used to, but I think it's fair to say that Australia is actively killing children. Their stay-at-home orders are complete BS, and I'm going to prove it to you. They say they have to lock down in New South Wales. Stay-at-home orders, pepper spraying children, arresting people, putting signs on their doors. Why? Because we can't allow COVID to spread. But rich people are allowed to go and do whatever they want. So is this really about COVID? If you're telling everyone they have to stay home, but the rich people can go out and do whatever and go on the beach and party, certainly it's not about stopping the spread of COVID. Otherwise, you'd be stopping them too. No, it's about suppressing and oppressing the people. We have this story here from 9 News Australia showing you exactly what the lockdowns mean. And many people are starting to point out that there's something strange going on, that wealthy people are basically allowed to skirt the rules. We've got photos of Chris Hemsworth surfing on the beach with his significant other. I don't know if they're married or not. Now, he apparently refused to do an op-ed for the vaccines for the government. And I can respect him standing on his principles. And I'm not trying to drag him for going surfing. I think everyone should be allowed to. But surprise, surprise, the wealthy celebrity is allowed and the regular people aren't. Now, I'm not trying to drag Chris. I think he's great. I'm a big fan. I don't know anything about him politically or anything like that. But the issue is the government. This is going to come here again to the United States, and it'll be worse than you realize. Oregon has already implemented outdoor mask mandates. And we're seeing very interesting tweets from moderate leftist types. Bill Maher, liberal, right? He said no booster shot. He won't do it because he took one for the team, so he says, and now he's like, what are we going to do? I'm not doing it. Yeah, well, Bill, LA is already preparing their vaccine mandates, so you'll have to. But we see other people on Twitter, one guy saying that, the deal was that if everyone got vaccinated, things would go back to normal, and they didn't. The deal was if everybody wore a mask, we'd flatten the curve and go back to normal. It didn't happen. And now in Australia, they're talking about building quarantine camps, internment camps, in 2022. Now, Dr. Fauci said previously that if we all, get vaccinated, we could have this done by fall of 2022. He later said, I misspoke. I meant spring of 2022. You see, there's a big difference between Fauci saying it'll be over spring of 2022 and Brisbane and New South Wales and Australia building quarantine camps in 2022. You know why? Telling people that this will wrap up by spring of 2022 means we're going to see the end. We will see the end in sight, and they'll say we're going to start reopening. If they wait until 2022 to build the camps, they're saying they're going to need them into next year. It will come to the United States. Let me show you what's going on in Australia. And again, I want to prove to you this is really about, at least in Australia, the wealthy getting access to whatever they want and poor people being suppressed and oppressed. Now, mind you, let me tell you something. I think the vaccines are safe and effective. Absolutely. I've looked at the VAERS reports. I've looked at, I've listened to people like Brett Weinstein. I've listened to even Democrats or Republicans. And you know what I think? I think you got to separate yourself from the culture war. Find a trusted medical professional. Talk to them about it. But I tell you this. What I see happening, social credit scores, absolute control. I don't think, we talked about this with Bannon the other day. When you want to see social credit scores coming, it starts with the vaccine. So I look at that. I look at the data and I'm like, I don't think the vaccine is the issue. I think it's the excuse. Listen, Trump is the one who created Operation Warp Speed and said, everybody get the vaccine. Now what we're seeing is Democrats using this as a way to create Chinese-style social credit systems. That's why I'm extremely opposed to the authoritarianism. But for medical decisions, I say you figure it out for yourself. Check this out. Sydney has extended their lockdown. Here's the area. I'm going to show you a map. I'm going to break things down for you, right? New South Wales COVID-19 restrictions. Look at this big old map. You got unincorporated New South Wales, snap lockdown. Even in the unincorporated middle of nowhere, okay, sure, fine. You can go around here. You can say stay-at-home order for these for these areas just outside of, I believe that's Sydney, Penrith, LGA. Okay. Now we move up and we can see. Let me see if I can find it. We got Lismore. We got Byron. Don't forget Byron. It's under a snap lockdown. Here's what they say. Snap lockdown, stay-at-home order applies. Snap lockdown, stay-at-home order applies. All of these. Let's jump to Byron and see what they say about Byron. This one's going to be very relevant. Snap lockdown, stay-at-home order applies. Byron, remember that. Now I want to show you what this means. Australia says you can only leave the home for the following 4 reasons. Shopping for essential items, 1 person only. LGA, 5 kilometers. You got to be within 5 kilometers of your house. Care and compassionate reasons, 1 visitor only. Exercise in groups no more than 2, excluding groups of household members within 5 kilometers or within LGA. No outdoor recreation. Work and education that cannot be conducted remotely. Single bubble. People who live alone can nominate 1 designated family member or friend to visit for companionship. What? Look at what's happening in Australia, a supposed Western nation. The mandates will come here. Education. Schools will conduct remote learning, but will remain open for students who need them. Masks must be worn in all non-residential indoor settings, outside while queuing for takeaway, at outdoor markets, and in all common property shared spaces of a residential building. Will be mandatory everywhere outside the home, except for when exercising from Monday, August 23rd. LGA of concern. Must wear a mask at all times outside the house, all times. 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew. Exercise limited to 1 hour per day. Must not go further than 5 kilometers from the home for exercise, shopping, or single bubble visits. Must not leave their LGA for work except emergency services and healthcare workers. Childcare workers and disability workers must have their first vaccine dose by August 30th. Authorized workers must carry a Service New South Wales permit. Construction workers can attend unoccupied sites if they meet vaccination conditions. This is absolutely incredible. What's happening here in Australia? Now let me break it down for you. I mentioned Byron because we have this story. Chris Hemsworth shows off his washboard abs as he goes surfing in Byron Bay with wife Elsa Pataki after refusing to appear in a campaign to promote the COVID-19 jab. Okay. They said he was working out. He's surfing, apparently. All right. It's exercise. But it said no recreational activity. I guess you can still argue this is how we get exercise. Fine. I'll tell you what I think this really means. It's an example of the wealthy elites being given a pass. Because here's the story from Bloomberg. Sydney's COVID outbreak shouldn't be fought on the beaches. Inconsistent containment measures in different parts of the city have bred misperceptions and suspicion among residents. More goodwill is needed. No. How about more freedom is needed? Let me show you Google. Here's Byron Bay. It's right up here. It's in Byron. It's in the snap lockdown, stay-at-home order area. So, okay, I'll be fair. Look, I'm not trying to drag Hemsworth, like I said. This is about the government. It's about the fact that there have been numerous stories where wealthy people are going to the beach with no issue, and poor people can barely leave their homes. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. As Bannon said the other day, you're going to be Russian serfs. Millennials will be impoverished Russian serfs. And what will that lead to? Perhaps it will lead to some kind of revolution or revolt. Bloomberg reports, my hometown of Sydney is a divided city. Never more so than now, in the grip of a COVID-19 outbreak that's overwhelmed its complacent sense of having escaped the pandemic. Oh, is that true? Sure. In the east, suburbs close to the beach and the cooling breezes of the Pacific are the playgrounds of the affluent. Further from the ocean lies the hotter, more multicultural, lower-income expanse of Western Sydney. The median house price in beachside Bondi, where the current outbreak first took hold, is nearly 3.5 million Australian dollars. That's 2.5 million US. In Oxley Park, 28 miles to its west, and currently seeing some of the highest rates of infection, it's around 650,000 Australian dollars. That divide is making the challenges of stamping out the current pandemic worse. Across the whole of Sydney, masks are mandatory. Non-essential retail is closed. And home visits in schools are off limits except in unusual circumstances. However, in places the government has defined as areas of concern to the west and southwest, there are also curfews from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., while children are only allowed outside for 1 hour of exercise per day. It's rarely a fairness thing that we're not being treated the same as the rest of Sydney. Carl Osfor, mayor of Canterbury Bankstown, one of the areas of concern, told Australian Broadcasting Corp Radio Monday. I'm not saying these restrictions shouldn't be brought in. I'm saying they should be applied equally to everybody. In a city that's also split by vaccination status, aggravating both sides of the social divide isn't a good way to get people to pull together. The 41% of the adult population who've not had even a first dose are dependent on others' compliance with lockdown measures to protect them. So what? You get the point. This is them talking about the wealthy being able to do their thing. You go to the beach, it's fine. But the funny thing about this article is that people are so pathetic that even when they claim to dissent, they are still on the side of the authoritarians, Nazis who have taken over. Let's get dark. From the Daily Mail. Warning of a shadow pandemic of youth suicide after huge spike in teenage girls taking their own lives, as helplines are flooded with calls, and depression, eating disorders, and self-harm reach record levels in lockdown. They know this happens. They don't care. Children are allowed only 1 hour of exercise per day. You can't go see your friends. Your life is on lockdown. These children are effectively being put in solitary confinement. The Daily Mail says, dozens of teenage girls in Australia are attempting suicide in what mental health experts are calling a shadow pandemic. New data from the Victorian Coroner's Court revealed 8 young women took their own lives in the first 7 months of this year. Statistics show the number is up from just 1 during the same period last year, after 3 in 2019, 4 in 2018, 3 in 2017. The alarming rise in teenage suicides comes as the grim extent of Australia's youth suicide crisis was exposed in the latest figures from Kids Helpline. Now, I want you to understand, this article is from only a couple of weeks ago. I wonder what could be driving it. They say Kids Helpline said heightened levels of despair and depression through the COVID-19 lockdowns was a major contributory factor in the increase. Professor Patrick McGorry, the head of youth mental health at the University of Melbourne, said the pandemic totally overwhelmed mental health services. The system is drowning or crumbling, he told The Australian. This is the shadow pandemic, and every lockdown makes it even worse. Professor McGorry described the loss of 8 young lives as a real phenomenon and said it sprung from a rising level of suicidal behavior in young women. There has been a very substantial surge, 20 to 30%, of deliberate self-harm and suicidal behavior that is occurring in particularly young women, and that is what's flooding into the emergency departments. So let's slow down and talk about what you are getting from your establishment. It is seeming to be more harmful to young women in this instance. It is lockdowns mostly affecting the multicultural, impoverished individuals, and the wealthy are free to roam and romp about. How is this in any way progressive? No, it's regressive. It's the regressive left. These people are racists, they're elitists, they're supremacists, and they're sexists. Across the board. They've always been. And they just try to use manipulation to convince you they're the ones who care about your freedom. But you take a look at what's happening in Australia. It's shocking and it's scary. But it's not all bad. People are starting to push back. Brisbane Times, August 21st. Crowd of thousands protest in Brisbane over COVID-19 lockdowns despite Queensland's success. Police estimate about 2,000 Brisbane protesters have marched down George Street, claiming that COVID-19 lockdown controls breach UN regulations. There were similar but far angrier rallies in Sydney and Melbourne, where lockdowns are enforced because of escalating COVID-19 cases. The Sydney and Melbourne rallies have turned aggressive. There were multiple arrests and were then canceled by organizers on social media apps. It is difficult to learn who called the rallies, but police believed they are organized on social media by overseas anti-COVID vaccination groups trying to gain traction in Australia. Or people in Australia are using encrypted communications to resist. It's funny. They called Trump the Nazi and the authoritarian. Look what they're doing here in the U.S. Delta Airlines to hike up health insurance premiums for unvaccinated employees by $200 a month. Again, I think the vaccines are fine. I think you can go to your doctor and you can choose for yourself what you think is right for you. Isn't that how it should work? But what they're doing is they're using it as an excuse to force compliance. It's always this way. When they want to gain access to someone's private encrypted communications, a company, what do? National security. You can't resist. You can't reject it. You got to give it up. What about when they want to gain control over digital companies? Child exploitation. Oh, yeah, because who's going to oppose laws to protect children, right? And here we have vaccination. Well, why wouldn't you get the vaccine, right? It's safe. Download the app. Carry your papers. Because what is the after effect of this? You need a physical ID to enter buildings in New York City. And of course, what they're going for is an app, a social credit system to make you fall in line and never challenge the system ever again. Authoritarianism doesn't work. Why? Because people resist. Naturally, people say no. So what they want to do is create a system where if you ever resist, they'll cut you off from your bank. It's already been happening. And so imagine this future. 10 million people in New York City, in the metro. I think it's like 13 in the greater metro. And they're all standing there with fake smiles on their faces, terrified that if they don't smile, they'll get a bump in their social credit score. Then they can't get on the train, like in China. Then they can't open a bank account. So everyone just shakes, and then eventually someone says, I can't take it anymore. And people start saying no. And the system starts breaking. And what happens is when you make it too rigid, it becomes brittle, it shatters. The system needs to be malleable to a certain extent, kind of like how the US is. Kind of like, because we're certainly going down the wrong path. You need flexibility in the system for it to change, to correct. Because if the system becomes too hard and brittle, the whole thing shatters, and then you have no system at all. But allowing people to move around and progress or even regress to a certain degree, like just to move a little bit and make arguments, is how you maintain a system. Flexibility. Rigidity will only bring about a quick demise. In Oregon, they have brought back outdoor mask mandates, even for those who are fully vaccinated. And I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. Yeah, this is bad. Yeah, I think a lot of people will comply, but I think this is going to start shattering the brains of many liberals. Not far leftists, I mean regular default liberals who don't pay attention. All of a sudden now they're going to be saying like, but wait a minute, you told me if I wore a mask and got vaccinated, this would all be over. But now it's coming back. Yeah, well, some of these people will just respond with, well, it's because people didn't get vaccinated and now there's variants and blah, blah, blah. If they come out and say, here's what you got to do to get everything back to normal, and you do it, and then nothing changes, you say, I don't care if it was someone else's fault. You told me what to do. I did it. And, oh, but not enough people did it. Well, you didn't say that. You said if we went and did it, we'd be good. You said the people who got the vaccine were safe. You said the lockdowns, the mandates, you're exempt if you have the vaccine. Now they're saying, oh, well, no, you still have to wear a mask and get a booster shot eventually. Okay. Why would anyone want to adhere to that? So maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe what this is a very weak attempt at an authoritarian power grab, which will result in the system itself shattering. The neocon, neoliberal elites who rob the working class blind are trying to squeeze out as much power as they can before the whole system plummets. They can't control it. They can't. You know, if they really wanted to make this effective, they'd be reasonable about it. But they think that they can get everyone, or at least an overwhelming majority, to bend the knee to their will, and it won't work. In Australia, it seems to be that it is, but there's different cultures. In the United States, I don't think it'll happen. Perhaps, though, in blue states, it will. In purple states. Red states are already saying no. Obviously, Texas and Florida. And people are moving. I think this will cause major demographic change. So we'll see. You see, there is an issue to consider. In certain blue states where you still have Republican members of Congress, if the Republicans flee the state mandate and go to a red state, then the Democrats will gain more seats in the House. You see how it works? You've got blue states like Illinois. They've got a ton of Republican Congress people, you know, from southern Illinois and things like that. What happens when all of these people say the state mandates are crazy, so I'm leaving? Now these areas become more blue because a higher density of Democrat people live there and remained and are okay with it. And then they vote for a Democrat congressman. I don't know if that's going to play out exactly that way, but I'll tell you this. What we're seeing in Australia is overt and obvious. It's causing the death of children. And so when we look at the signs, we look for the signs and we see them here in the U.S., speak now or forever hold your peace. These people want power. They will not just give it up. People need to be, there needs to be nonviolent civil disobedience, some good protest. There needs to be people speaking up at the workplace, saying no. And this may be an outcome, economic collapse. Because I tell you this, there's a large portion of people, probably around 40%, who are going to say, I will not follow your mandates, and they'll quit. And then what? Honestly, I don't know, but there's already a food shortage. So I hope you're paying attention. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.